You ever wake up thinking your life is exactly how you left it, only to realize everything has changed? I came home after 18 months overseas and found 83 condos built on my land. The security guard told me that we've got a guy at the south entrance, says this is his property. And when they found out what I do for a living, they went pale. They stole my land, but they had no idea what was coming next. Mike Reynolds gripped the steering wheel as his truck rumbled down the familiar backroads of Pinehurst, his hometown. The last time he'd driven this route, he was heading to the airport, boarding a military transport that would take him halfway across the world. 18 months of grueling deployment, dodging sandstorms and following orders, and now finally he was home. But something was wrong. The land his grandfather had left him, his land, was supposed to be an open field, a peaceful sanctuary where he once played as a kid. But instead of untouched soil and towering oaks, rows of pristine luxury condos stretched across the horizon, their reflective glass windows gleaming under the midday sun. Mike's heart pounded. His truck came to a sudden halt at the entrance to what now appeared to be a gated community. A security guard in a crisp uniform stepped forward, placing a firm hand on his holster as he eyed Mike suspiciously. "Can I help you, sir?" the guard asked, scanning the large Precision Demolition Services logo on the side of Mike's truck. Mike didn't answer right away. His pulse thundered in his ears as he reached for the deed to the land, tucked into the glove compartment. His grandfather's legacy, his rightful property. He took a deep breath and leveled his voice. "Yeah, you can tell me why the hell there are buildings on my land." The security guard's expression darkened as he reached for his radio. "I've got someone at the south entrance claiming this is his land." A few minutes later, a sleek black SUV pulled up, the engine purring like a satisfied predator. The door swung open, and out stepped a woman in an expensive navy suit, her blonde hair pulled so tightly into a bun it looked painful. She surveyed Mike with sharp blue eyes before extending a manicured hand. "I'm Eleanor Walsh, president of Sunset Shores Homeowners Association," she announced smoothly. "And you are—" Mike ignored her outstretched hand. He already knew that name. The Walsh family had a reputation in town. Real estate moguls, political donors, and some whispered crooks who always got their way. "I'm Mike Reynolds," he said coldly, "the owner of this land." Eleanor's smile barely faltered. "Mr. Reynolds, there must be some mistake. This development has been underway for over a year. We followed every proper channel." Mike pulled out his phone and flashed photos taken right before his deployment. Pictures of the same land, empty and untouched. "Does this look like a developed lot to you?" he asked. Eleanor's eyes flickered with something. Panic? Annoyance? Before she forced another smile. "Perhaps we should continue this discussion in my office," she suggested, rather than making a scene. Mike followed her toward the gleaming community center, taking in the meticulously maintained gardens, the modern architecture, the people who had no idea they were living on stolen land. He felt their eyes on him as he passed. And then, from the corner of his vision, a woman stormed toward them. "Eleanor, my sprinklers still aren't working, and maintenance keeps ignoring my calls," she snapped. She was middle-aged, her neatly pressed blouse and pearl earrings screaming HOA loyalist. She stopped mid-rant when she noticed Mike. "Who's this?" she demanded, looking him up and down like he was an intruder. "Just a small property matter, Diane," Eleanor said smoothly. "I'll handle your sprinklers this afternoon." Diane narrowed her eyes. "You're not moving in, are you?" she asked Mike. "Because we have very strict rules about lawn care and exterior modifications." Mike let out a bitter chuckle. They built 83 condos on his land without permission, but heaven forbid someone planted the wrong type of flowers. Eleanor shot him a warning glance before ushering him into her office. The moment the office door closed behind them, Eleanor's demeanor shifted. The polished, professional mask cracked just enough to reveal a sharp-edged predator beneath. She slid a stack of papers across the desk. "These are the rezoning approvals and purchase documents," she said. "As you can see, everything is in order." Mike flipped through the pages, his breath hitching when he reached the last document. There at the bottom was his name, his signature. Except he never signed this. His blood ran cold. "This isn't my signature," he said, his voice steady despite the fury rising in his chest. Eleanor sighed. as if she would deal with a child who just didn't understand. Mr. Reynolds, we sent multiple notices to your registered address. When we received signed approval, we proceeded legally. Mike's hands clenched into fists. I was deployed overseas. I never received any notices. And I sure as hell never signed this. Eleanor leaned forward, her voice dropping to a coaxing whisper. Look, these condos house 83 families. People with children, elderly parents. What exactly do you expect to happen here? Her meaning was clear. You're the bad guy if you fight this. Before Mike could respond, his phone buzzed with a text. Welcome home, boss. When can you come by the office? New demolition contracts waiting for your signature. Eleanor's eyes flicked to the message preview. Her face went pale. You're in the demolition business? She asked, her voice suddenly unsure. Mike stood. I am. And I don't appreciate finding my property demolished and rebuilt without my permission. Eleanor swallowed hard. She had made a terrible mistake. Mike didn't wait for her response. She wasn't in control anymore. As he walked out, Diane was waiting. I heard you arguing, she sneered. Who do you think you are, causing trouble in our peaceful community? Mike locked eyes with her. I'm the guy who owns the dirt under your feet. And if I were you, I'd start packing. Diane's face paled as Mike climbed into his truck. As he drove off, he caught Eleanor and Diane in his rearview mirror, both on their phones, both gesturing frantically. They weren't going to take this lying down. That night, as Mike spread his grandfather's old property maps across the kitchen table, a name flashed through his mind. Tom, his old army buddy, now a lawyer. He dialed. They built condos on my land while I was deployed, he said when Tom picked up, and they forged my signature on the documents. There was a long pause. That's federal fraud, Mike, Tom finally said, especially since you were on active duty. Mike exhaled slowly. How fast can we move on this? The next morning, Mike drove to the county records office. Margaret, the records clerk, lowered her voice when she saw him. Such a shame what they did to your grandfather's land, she murmured as she pulled out the original deeds. You know about the condos? Mike asked. Margaret nodded. Everyone knows. But nobody says anything. Richard Walsh has half the county board in his pocket. She slipped him a note with a name and number. Call this person at the planning department, she whispered. They've been waiting for someone to challenge the Walshes. Mike's war was just beginning. Mike sat across from Tom in his downtown law office, a steaming cup of untouched coffee growing cold between them. The air was thick with tension as Tom skimmed through the stack of documents Mike had brought, the fraudulent signatures, the land records, the zoning approvals. His frown deepened with every page. This is worse than I thought, Tom muttered, flipping to another document. Not only did they forge your signature, but they backdated it to make it look like you approved this over a year ago. This isn't just fraud. It's premeditated fraud. Mike exhaled sharply, running a hand over his jaw. How fast can we hit them with legal action? Tom leaned back in his chair, calculating. We'll file an emergency injunction first thing in the morning. That'll put a legal freeze on any further development. If this holds up, they won't be able to sell another unit, lease any properties, or continue construction until we sort this out. Mike nodded. Good. But what about the homes already built? Tom's expression darkened. That's where it gets tricky. If we win, you could technically force them to demolish the condos or demand they compensate you for the land at full market value. Mike let out a humorless laugh. So, either I become a villain for tearing down 83 families' homes, or they get away with stealing my land? Not necessarily. Tom drummed his fingers on his desk. First, let's get the injunction approved. Then we'll figure out how to make sure you win this without becoming the bad guy. Mike nodded. He wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting against the corruption that had been allowed to fester in this town for too long. The next morning, as Mike was heading to the courthouse with Tom, his phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. You think you're clever, Reynolds? A voice sneered. Mike instantly recognized it. Richard Walsh. Wish I could say the same about you, Walsh. Mike tightened his grip on the phone. But forging my signature? That's sloppy work. Richard laughed, but there was no humor in it. You really think some little injunction is going to stop me? I built half this town. You're one man. I have an army of lawyers, judges, and politicians who owe me favors. Yeah, Mike shot back. Well, I have the law, and I have the truth. We'll see which one wins, Richard said before the line went dead. By noon, the injunction was approved. Sunset Shores was officially frozen. No sales, no new developments, nothing. But Mike barely had time to celebrate before a police cruiser pulled up to his house. 2 uniformed officers stepped out, and with them was none other than Eleanor Walsh, standing smugly beside a man in an expensive charcoal suit. Mike crossed his arms. You lost the first round, so now you're sending the cops after me? The older officer sighed. Mr. Reynolds, we had multiple complaints from Sunset Shores residents. They claim you've been making threats. Eleanor pressed a hand dramatically to her chest. He told residents to start packing. He runs a demolition company. He's clearly planning to bulldoze homes with families inside. The younger officer snorted, quickly composing himself when Eleanor shot him a glare. Mike exhaled, pinching the bridge of his nose. Officer, I informed Mrs. Walsh that she built condos on my land illegally. I suggested residents consider their options. That's not a threat, it's reality. The older officer glanced at the paperwork Tom handed him. Military service records, the land deed, the forgery proof. After a long moment, he turned to Eleanor. This is a civil matter, Mrs. Walsh. Not criminal. Work it out in court. Eleanor's face turned red, but she forced a tight smile. Of course, officer. Thank you for your time. As the police left, Richard Walsh stepped forward, his massive charm slipping. You have no idea who you're dealing with, Reynolds. You really think anyone in this town will take your side over mine? Mike met his gaze, unwavering. I don't need the whole town, Walsh. Just a judge. And I have one now. That evening, an emergency HOA meeting was scheduled at the Sunset Shores Community Center. An official notice had been taped to Mike's front door, attendance mandatory. Can they force me to attend? Mike asked as he and Tom walked toward the building. They can't, Tom said. But I think it's a good idea. We need to see what they're planning. The moment they stepped inside, all eyes turned to them. The room was packed, residents whispering and pointing in hushed conversations. Eleanor and Richard stood at the front, playing the role of concerned leaders. Eleanor cleared her throat. Thank you all for coming on such short notice. As you may have heard, our community is under attack. Gasps spread to the crowd. This man, Eleanor continued, dramatically pointing to Mike, claims that our homes are built on his land. He runs a demolition company, and he has made it very clear what he intends to do. The tension in the room thickened. Residents murmured worriedly. Diane Thompson stood up sharply. If this man owns the land, why didn't he say anything when construction started? Why wait until families had already moved in? Mike stood up. Because I was deployed overseas serving this country when the Walshes forged my signature. A hush fell over the room. An elderly man near the front cleared his throat. My grandson is in the Army. Is it true? You were serving when this happened. Eleanor opened her mouth to deflect, but Mike was faster. Yes, and forging documents while a military member is on active duty carries federal penalties. That got their attention. People turned to look at the Walshes now. Uneasy murmurs spread through the crowd. And then the doors opened and Olivia Bennett stepped inside. Excuse me, she said, but I believe HOA meetings are open to the public under state law. Section 33 to 1804. I assume we're following the law tonight. Eleanor's smile faltered. Mike pulled out the official property records, his military orders, and the forgery evidence. These are the documents they used to steal my land, he said. And this, he held up a noose of papers, is a federal complaint against Richard and Eleanor Walsh for fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. Gasps. More whispers. People weren't looking at Mike anymore. They were looking at the Walshes. Then a man in the back stood up, holding an official-looking document. I'm Kevin Jang from the county surveyor's office. I've reviewed the original property lines. 38 units are indeed built on Mr. Reynolds' land. Chaos erupted. Richard grabbed Eleanor's arm, and whispered something urgent. Then, without warning, he slipped out a side door. Phone pressed his ear. Mike knew this wasn't over. The next morning, a sheriff's deputy knocked on Mike's door and handed him legal papers. You're being banned from Sunset Shores. You're also prohibited from operating demolition equipment within 500 feet of the development. Mike read the signature at the bottom. Judge Henderson, Richard Walsh's former law partner. Tom shook his head. They're trying to isolate you, Mike. They know they're losing. Just then, Olivia's phone buzzed. She checked it and went pale. They're holding another meeting, she said, and they're telling residents they need to pay $50,000 per household for a legal defense fund. Mike's jaw clenched. They're trying to squeeze more money out of the people they already scammed. He grabbed his keys. Then, let's make sure they don't get away with it. The war wasn't just legal anymore. It was personal. Mike pulled his truck into a side street near Sunset Shores, keeping his distance. Olivia sat in the passenger seat, furiously typing notes while Tom, in the back, was on the phone with a state prosecutor. Inside the Sunset Shores Community Center, a crowd had gathered. The Walshes stood at the front, playing their final gambit, a fake legal defense fund. If we all stand together, Eleanor said, her voice smooth as silk, we can protect our homes. But legal battles are costly. That's why we're asking for a small contribution, $50,000 per household. The crowd murmured uneasily. $50,000 wasn't small by any means. Richard Walsh clutched a wooden box, where residents were dropping checks and cash. There was no receipt book, no legal documentation, just pure theft, disguised as salvation. Olivia checked her phone. Mike, residents are texting me. Some are skeptical, but others are actually paying. They're scared. Mike's hands clenched. Not for long. With a deep breath, he stepped out of the truck and marched into the meeting. The room went silent. Richard's eyes flashed with pure rage. You have no right to be here, Reynolds. Security. Mike cut him off. Before you do something stupid, you should know that the FBI is investigating you. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Eleanor forced a smile. Oh, please. The FBI? Over a simple property dispute? Mike stepped forward, holding up documents. No, over forgery, fraud, and conspiracy against a military service member. Whispers turned into full-blown panic. Diane stood up, her face pale. You're lying. Richard wouldn't steal from us. Then tell me why he's taking cash and checks without issuing receipts, Mike challenged. He pointed to the wooden box of money Richard was gripping. Eyes turned to Richard, his face going from red to white. Suddenly, he bolted for the exit. Diane was faster. She blocked the door. Give us back our money. Two men grabbed Richard, pinning him against the wall. The box fell, spilling cash and checks onto the floor. Eleanor tried to slip out a side door, but Olivia blocked her path. Going somewhere, Mrs. Walsh? Olivia asked, camera rolling. Then, sirens wailed outside. Mike smiled. Perfect timing. FBI agent Torres stepped through the front doors, badge in hand. Four officers followed. Richard and Eleanor Walsh, Torres announced, his voice ringing to the stunned crowd. You are under arrest for fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. Richard snarled at Mike. You think this is over? I have friends in high places. Torres didn't flinch. Not for long. We're investigating those friends, too. As Eleanor was being cuffed, she turned to the crowd, her voice trembling. You fools, she hissed. You wouldn't even have homes without us. You should be thanking us. Diane stepped forward, her hands trembling. We trusted you. Eleanor sneered. Then you're all idiots. Torres nudged her toward the exit. That'll look great in court. As the Walshes were escorted outside, Olivia turned to Mike. How does it feel to finally see them in cuffs? Mike watched the flashing police lights and shook his head. They're gone, he said, but their mess isn't. He turned back to the frightened residents, most clutching their refunded checks, their world collapsing around them. What happens to us now? Someone asked. Mike sighed. That was the next battle. The next morning, Mike stood in his kitchen, sipping black coffee, tried to figure out the best way to save the residents. His phone buzzed. A message from Olivia. "You need to see this." She sent a photo of a legal notice. Mike's stomach dropped. Richard had filed evictions. 83 of them. That snake. Even from jail, he was still trying to ruin lives. Tom called seconds later. "I don't know how, but Walsh pulled strings. The evictions are official. If we don't stop this, everyone is out in 48 hours. Mike ran a hand through his hair. That wasn't part of the court ruling. It wasn't, Tom agreed. But Richard convinced a judge that the buildings are unsafe. That means emergency removal orders. Mike felt the blood drain from his face. "They're about to be homeless," he murmured. "Not on his watch." Mike jumped in his truck, racing to Sunset Shores. When he arrived, the scene was heartbreaking. Families packing bags, moving trucks idling, children clutching stuffed animals, confused. Diane stormed up to him, her face twisted with rage. "Are you happy now, Reynolds? You won. My daughter is 8 months pregnant, and she's sleeping on my couch." The entire community turned to glare at him. Mike held up his hands. "I had nothing to do with this. Richard did this from jail." Diane scoffed. "Convenient excuse." Mike met her glare. "If I wanted you all out, I wouldn't be here trying to fix it." Silence. Then one voice in the crowd asked, "What are you going to do?" Mike took a deep breath. "You'll have your answer by noon. Just don't leave yet." Back at Tom's office, papers covered the desk. Legal documents, land valuations, housing contracts. Tom looked up, brow furrowed. "Are you sure about this, Mike?" Mike nodded. "I know what my grandfather wanted for that land. It wasn't to see 83 families thrown onto the streets." Tom hesitated. "You could sell to a developer and make millions." Mike exhaled. "It's not about money. I want to do what's right." Tom grabbed the new contracts. "Then let's go fix this." Noon. Mike stood in the center of Sunset Shores, holding a stack of legal documents. Diane and the other residents watched him warily. Mike raised his voice. "I had every legal right to demolish these homes and sell this land to developers. But I won't." Shocked whispers. "I'm offering to sell the land to you, the current homeowners, at half the market price." Gasps. "And for any veteran or active military personnel, I'm reducing the price another 25%. Diane's jaw dropped. "Why would you do that?" Mike met her eyes. "Because it's the right thing to do." Tears. Smiles. Relief. The residents had gone from victims to owners. As news crews arrived, Olivia whispered, "This story just became national news." Mike chuckled. "Demolition man saves a community instead of tearing it down?" She grinned. "Something like that." Mike turned, watching families hug, laugh, and cry. For the first time since coming home, he felt at peace. The sun dipped low over Sunset Shores, casting an amber glow on the relieved faces of the newly empowered homeowners. For the first time in months, there was no HOA threatening them, no corrupt developer manipulating them, and no police knocking on their doors. But Mike wasn't naive. He knew there was one final loose end. Richard Walsh. As residents hugged and celebrated, Olivia motioned for him to step aside. She had that look, the one that meant trouble. "You need to see this," she whispered, holding up her phone. On the screen was a leaked email thread between Richard Walsh and an unnamed contact. Mike skimmed through the messages, his fists clenching as the words burned into his brain. Richard wasn't finished. Even from his prison cell, he was still pulling strings. His plan? Appeal the court ruling and use his political connections to have Sunset Shores condemned as structurally unsafe. If he succeeded, he could reverse everything Mike had fought for. And the residents? They'd still lose their homes. Mike exhaled slowly, trying to keep his anger in check. The war wasn't over yet. By morning, Richard's latest attack was all over the news. Disgraced developer claims Sunset Shores buildings are structurally unsound. New eviction notices incoming. Could veteran Mike Reynolds' victory be short-lived? Mike tossed the newspaper onto the table in disgust. "This is complete garbage," he muttered. Tom was already on it, making calls to the county offices. Walsh still has a few allies left, Tom admitted. If we don't act fast, they'll label the entire development uninhabitable and force everyone out again. Legally this time. Mike's mind raced. There had to be a way to prove the buildings were safe before Richard's people could execute their plan. Then an idea struck him. What if we get ahead of them? He asked. Tom frowned. How? We bring in our own independent engineers and have them inspect the entire property. If they certify the condos as structurally sound, Walsh's appeal will be dead before it even reaches a judge. Tom's eyes lit up. That could work. Mike pulled out his phone and made a call. Hey, it's Mike Reynolds. I need an expert opinion on whether 83 condos are about to collapse or if a certain developer is just full of crap. 3 days later, construction engineers and safety inspectors roamed Sunset Shores. Every wall, every foundation, every structure was examined. The results? 0 structural issues. These condos are in perfect shape, one inspector told Mike, shaking his head. If anything, they were built better than most developments I've seen. Mike grinned. Would you be willing to put that in writing? By 5 p.m., official certification documents were filed with the county. The residents of Sunset Shores weren't just legally safe, they were bulletproof. That night, Olivia broadcasted the truth live on local news. Breaking. Sunset Shores declared structurally sound. Walsh's eviction attempts crushed. Even from his prison cell, Richard had to be watching. Mike imagined the look on his face when he realized his last trick had failed. Checkmate. With the battle finally behind him, Mike could start focusing on his own future. The land his grandfather had left him wasn't just the home of Sunset Shores. A small section of it, the part that hadn't been touched by the Walshes, was still his to do with as he pleased. That night, as he walked the undeveloped portion of his land, a familiar voice called out behind him, "Building something?" Mike turned. Catherine, his ex-wife, stood a few feet away, hands tucked into her coat pockets. Mike studied her carefully. The last time they'd spoken, she had confessed to betraying him to the Walshes. "What are you doing here?" he asked, keeping his tone neutral. She hesitated. "I heard about the inspections. Thought you might need someone to celebrate with." Mike let out a dry chuckle. "Not sure we're the celebrating together stage, Catherine." A flicker of pain crossed her face, but she didn't argue. "I know I messed up," she admitted, "but I didn't want to see Richard win. I gave Olivia everything I had on him. It helped, didn't it?" Mike sighed. It had. Catherine had played a role in his downfall, but in the end, she had also helped take him down. "People deserve second chances," Mike finally said. "Even you." Her eyes widened slightly, surprised. "I appreciate that," she murmured. "So, what are you going to do with the rest of the land?" Mike glanced around. "Build my own home, like my grandfather always wanted." She nodded, something unreadable in her expression. "That sounds right." As she turned to leave, she hesitated. "Mike," she said softly, "I know I don't deserve it, but if you ever want to get coffee just to talk—" "One step at a time, Catherine," he interrupted gently. A small smile tugged at her lips. "One step at a time." As she walked away, Mike turned back to the land he had fought so hard for. It was time to start building his future. Weeks later, Sunset Shores had transformed. The corrupt HOA was gone. The residents now ran their own community, free from manipulative leaders and greedy developers. And in the middle of it all, Mike stood where his grandfather's old porch once was, watching as construction workers laid the foundation for his new home. It wasn't just a house. It was a symbol, a reminder that he had won, not just for himself, but for an entire community. As he looked around, he saw people who had once been his enemies now becoming his allies. Diane Thompson waved as she walked past, now a key member of the new HOA leadership. Olivia was nearby, her press badge tucked away, snapping photos of the newly rebuilt neighborhood. "You did it," she said, coming to stand beside him. "We did it," Mike corrected. Olivia smirked. "This story is going national. You know, veterans save community from corrupt developers." Mike chuckled. "I'm not looking for fame." She raised an eyebrow. "Then what are you looking for?" Mike exhaled. looking at the land that had nearly been stolen from him, at the homes that were once built on lies but now stood on justice, at the future he was finally reclaiming. "Peace," he said simply. Olivia studied him for a moment, then smiled. "I think you found it." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long golden shadows over sunset shores, Mike took a deep breath and let it all settle in. For the first time in a long time, he felt whole again. The land was finally his. And this time, no one was taken away. The sun had barely risen when Tom's urgent call shattered the quiet morning. Mike sat up in bed, already sensing bad news. "Tell me it's not Richard again," he muttered, rubbing his temples. Tom's sigh on the other end said everything. He just filed a last-ditch appeal. Tom confirmed. Claims his conviction was politically motivated, and that he was set up by... Let me guess. Mike cut in. "Me?" "Not just you," Tom said grimly. "He's accusing the county officials, the judge, and the FBI of conspiring against him. And get this, he's requesting house arrest instead of prison." Mike's grip tightened on his phone. "So he steals land, forges documents, scams people out of their savings, and you want to spend his punishment in a mansion with a lake view?" "Pretty much," Tom said dryly. "But there's more. He's trying to get the Sunset Shore sale overturned." Mike's stomach dropped. If Richard succeeded, the residents would lose everything again. "How long do we have?" Mike asked. "The appeal hearing is in 3 days," Tom said. "We need to be ready." Mike exhaled slowly. Richard was like a cockroach, refusing to die even after being stomped on. But if he wanted one last fight, Mike would be ready. 3 days later, the courtroom was packed. Sunset Shore's residents filled the seats, their faces etched with anger and fear. Richard Walsh sat at the defense table, smug and confident, his expensive gray suit freshly pressed. Even in cuffs, he radiated the arrogance of a man who thought he was untouchable. Mike sat beside Tom, watching Judge Martinez enter the room. She adjusted her glasses and got straight to the point. "Mr. Walsh, your appeal claims you were falsely accused. Your legal team has submitted character witness statements arguing for house arrest." She glanced up, unimpressed. "Most of these witnesses appear to be former business associates. Not exactly unbiased testimony." Richard leaned forward, his voice smooth. "Your Honor, I've given this town jobs, homes, economic growth. I was targeted because of my success." Mike clenched his fists. This guy had no shame. Judge Martinez raised an eyebrow. "Let's address your claim that Sunset Shore should be seized due to an improper sale." Richard's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, Mr. Reynolds pressured homeowners into buying." "Objection!" Tom interrupted. "The sales were voluntary, legally documented, and approved by this very court." Judge Martinez nodded. Sustained. Richard's lawyer tried again. Many residents didn't fully understand. Mike stood. "Your Honor, I'll make this simple," he said. "Every homeowner who bought their condo from me is in this courtroom right now. If they feel pressured, they can speak for themselves." Judge Martinez turned to the gallery. "Would any Sunset Shores resident like to address the court?" Silence. Then Diane Thompson stood. "Your Honor," she said, voice steady, "I was one of the loudest critics against Mike Reynolds at first. I believed the Walshes. I was wrong." She turned, facing Richard. "You stole from us. You lied to us. And when you couldn't bleed us for more money, you tried to destroy us. We're done being your victims." A ripple of agreement spread through the courtroom. Judge Martinez leaned back in her chair, watching Richard's face pale. "That settles that," she said. "Mr. Walsh, your appeal is denied. Your conviction stands." Richard's mask cracked. "You can't." Judge Martinez cut him off. "Additionally, I find no legal grounds to seize Sunset Shores from its current owners. The sales remain final." Mike exhaled, relief flooding him. The residents were safe. Richard slumped back in his chair, his world crumbling for good. But Judge Martinez wasn't done. "As for your request for house arrest," she said, "given your history of forgery, witness intimidation, and fraud against a military service member, I believe a stricter sentence is warranted." She grabbed a folder. Therefore, I am extending your prison sentence by an additional 5 years. The courtroom erupted. Richard shot up from his chair. You can't do this. Sit down, Mr. Walsh. Judge Martinez said coldly. Court is adjourned. Gavel slam. Game over. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarm Mike. Mr. Reynolds, what's your reaction? Did you ever think you went against the Walshes? How does it feel knowing Richard Walsh will be behind bars for even longer? Mike paused, then said simply, justice was served. That's all that matters. Diane appeared beside him. So it's really over? Mike nodded. Yeah, it's over. She smiled the first time. I misjudged you, Reynolds, she admitted. Easy mistake. Mike said, most demolition experts aren't known for building communities. She laughed. As the cameras flashed and the news spread, Mike felt lighter. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't fighting a battle. He was moving forward. A month later, Sunset Shores had never looked better. Without the HOA's corruption, residents had formed their own self-managed community. Mike's house was almost finished. One evening, as he stood on the porch, Olivia walked up beside him. You did it, she said. You turned a war zone into a home. Mike smiled. Not bad for a guy who was supposed to bulldoze everything. She chuckled. The national media loves the story. He groaned. Please tell me I'm not a meme. Not yet, she teased. But people are calling you the demolition man who built a community. Mike shook his head. Not the worst nickname. She nudged him. So what's next? Mike looked around. The land, the homes, the people. Living, he said simply. For the first time in years, he had no battles left to fight. Months later, Sunset Shores thrived. Families flourished. Children played in the new park that Mike had funded on the undeveloped part of his land. And Mike? He was home. One evening, he stood at the edge of his land, staring at the sunset. Catherine approached, hands in her pockets. You really did it, she murmured. Yeah, he said, nodding. I did. A comfortable silence stretched between them. Then she smiled. That coffee offer still stands, you know. Mike considered her for a moment. Then, with a small grin, he nodded. Maybe one day, he said. As Catherine walked away, Olivia strolled up. You ever get tired of standing out here, watching the sunset? Mike glanced at her. Not yet. She leaned against the porch railing. Good, because this story isn't over. Mike smirked. Maybe not, but for now. He took a deep breath, taking in everything he had fought for. It's finally home. And for the first time in a long, long time, Mike Reynolds was exactly where he belonged. Sunset bathed Sunset Shores in golden hues as Mike stood on the porch of his newly built home, watching families settle into their lives. The transformation was astonishing. A year ago, this place had been a battleground, a stolen dream, a corrupt empire of fraud and deception. But now, it was a symbol of resilience, of justice, of home. Mike's eyes scanned the streets, where neighbors helped each other with groceries. Kids rode their bikes on the freshly paved sidewalks, and the park he had funded was alive with laughter. Diane Thompson, once one of his fiercest adversaries, now helped run the community board. She waved at Mike as she walked by, her daughter, now a mother herself, pushing a stroller. Tom had told him that the official paperwork had come through. Sunset Shores was now legally recognized as a resident-owned community. No more corrupt HOAs. No more greedy developers. They were free, and yet something still felt unfinished. Mike knew he had won the battle, but deep down, he wasn't done building. Later that night, Mike walked out onto the untouched portion of his land, the only part of the 5 acres the Walshes hadn't been able to steal. He stood there for a long time, picturing what his grandfather had wanted. A home, yes, but more than that, a place where people could come together, a space where veterans could find support and belonging. An idea began to take root. He called Tom the next morning. I want to build something, Mike said. Tom chuckled. Didn't you just finish building a house? Not for me, Mike said. For others. He explained his plan, a community center, not just a recreational building, but a place where veterans, struggling families, and displaced workers could find resources, job training, and support. A place where no one would be forced out the way the Walshes had tried to force him out. Tom was silent for a moment, then let out a low whistle. "That's big, Mike." "It's what my grandfather wanted," Mike said. Simply. Tom exhaled. "All right, let's make it happen." Building a community center wasn't as simple as laying bricks. Mike had spent months in court, months fighting legal battles, but now he faced an entirely different kind of war. Bureaucracy, permits, zoning restrictions, funding. Despite owning the land, there were hurdles everywhere, and unsurprisingly, some of the old guard in town weren't happy about his plans. One afternoon, while meeting with the City Planning Commission, an older man in a stiff gray suit tapped his pen against the table. "You're requesting approval for a multi-use facility," he said slowly. "But this area wasn't zoned for public service buildings." Mike folded his arms. "So rezone it." The man chuckled dryly. "That's not how this works, Mr. Reynolds." A woman sitting beside him flipped through a file. "This proposal is ambitious. You want a resource center, a food pantry, a job training program. You expect the city to approve this." Mike's patience was thinning. You had no problem approving an illegal HOA that scammed people out of their homes. But now that someone wants to build something that actually helps, you're concerned? The room fell silent. The man in gray cleared his throat. "We'll need to conduct a full review before we make a decision." Mike recognized bureaucratic stalling when he saw it. They were going to bury his proposal in paperwork, hoping he'd give up. But Mike wasn't that kind of man. He walked out of the meeting, pulled out his phone, and called Olivia. "I need a favor," he said. "We're taking this fight public." The next morning, Olivia's front-page article hit the town like a bomb. Local veterans plan to help community blocked by city officials. But why? The reaction was immediate. Residents who had once been skeptical of Mike rallied behind him. Veterans groups reached out, offering support and funding. Even a few local business owners pledged donations. And when the city officials tried to delay the next zoning meeting, a group of over 200 residents showed up demanding answers. Mike stood at the podium, facing the same officials who had tried to dismiss him. "Let's be clear," he said, his voice firm. "I'm not here asking for a handout. I'm asking for the chance to build something that will help people. If you won't approve this, I want to hear you say on record why this project isn't worth it." The officials shifted uncomfortably. The pressure was mounting. And then the same woman who had questioned him earlier spoke up. "I'd like to put forth a motion to approve the rezoning request," she said, glancing at her colleagues. One by one, hands raised in agreement. "Motion passed," she said. Mike exhaled. The roadblocks were gone. It was time to build. Months later, Mike stood in front of the newly completed community center. It was exactly what he had envisioned. A place where people could find help, find work, find hope. The name? Reynolds Veterans and Community Center. Named not for himself, but for his grandfather. The grand opening was packed. The mayor, despite being forced into approval, gave a speech about progress. Diane was there, helping set up tables. Olivia, documenting everything. And Catherine? She stood off the side, watching. When Mike caught her eye, she smiled softly. "Looks like you finally built what you were meant to build," she said. Mike nodded. "Yeah, I did." That night, as the last of the crowd trickled out, Olivia joined him outside. "You finally happy?" she asked. Mike looked around. At the land that was once nearly stolen. At the homes that once held fear, but now held security. At the people who had once stood against him, now standing with him. And at the center that would outlive him, continuing to serve others long after he was gone. He took a deep breath. "Yeah," he said finally, "I'm home." And for the first time, he truly was